The topic of the discussion will remain the same. Uh, so I'll be talking about a real-life example of using Tom Gill's methods in deciding what to do next in the project based on actual high business needs of a company called PizzaPortal. Probably quite a few of you know what that company does. It doesn't just sell pizza, actually, it sells a lot of different food types. Uh, so let's get going. Again, sorry uh, for Tomek, he couldn't be here, but he apologized to me 100 times. I have to apologize to you again. Uh, but the topic remains. So, why did we decide to uh, go with business value? Why did we decide to change our approach? Because Senfino started as a small company and it was a pure software house. So we took some briefs, we estimated how much time they would take to implement, and we just implemented them. So it started very similarly to other software houses. But when we talked with clients, some of them came out to us with just very generic ideas. So they didn't really know what they wanted to be implemented, and we had the expertise to talk about it. But that wasn't really our goal. Our goal to connect the business side of things to software development. We still focused for a while on just the implementation. But we really saw value of cooperating with clients even more, and they really wanted this kind of connection with us. Not all of them, but definitely some of them did. So this is where we started, right? We had expertise, we had programmers, graphics designers, UX designers, quite a few different specialist types on our team, and the client had everything except that, right? Usually. Sometimes they had maybe a team that did the server side of things, but they wanted a mobile app or they wanted a website that would complement the whole system. But they when they had an idea, they wanted to make sure that that idea worked. So we talked a little bit about their idea, but it wasn't very it was a very generic talk. It didn't really come out of any kind of real data, and so it still was just a very basic talk always. So we eventually moved to about this state. That's where we are now. So we can work with the client on finding the right people and checking out whether the idea will work with them well or not. We can work on the business side of the client, so we will check with him what kind of goals he has in terms of business. So for example, he might want to increase his revenue by 10% by building something, right? We can do analytics with them. So some clients come up to us with data that they've collected from their existing apps. Sometimes they don't have that data. So we also cooperate with them on finding out the best ways of collecting that data so that it will be useful. Because it's quite easy to connect a website to Google Analytics, for example, but you will get a lot of data and most of it not very useful, or it will need to be processed first, and then we can actually find out how it correlates with the business goals that we need to achieve. And what is very important to us still is not to interfere with the business of the client. So the client is still the specialist in that field. He knows how he wants the company to to develop in the future, right? He will still decide how he wants the company to be seen outside. So we just sit with him and just ask him a lot of different questions, and we just start analyzing with him and looking at what we can do together. So we at first we didn't know whether it would be Tom Gilb or anything else. So we just searched around, and it turned out that Tom Gilb's approach really responded to the needs of clients. So not only did we just brainstorm with him and look at the people involved in the projects, not only did we gather requirements from them, but we also quantified those requirements. It's one of the major differences between Tom Gilb's approach and others. So we met with him a couple of times on different conferences. We talked with him about our ideas, and a few people from our company read this book, and it really responded well to what we needed. It contains a lot of information about language, which is a language that Tom Gilb developed for the purposes of creating specifications. That's important, but we don't really use it because it's very complicated, and we definitely don't want clients involved in that. We really want them to just easily cooperate with us. So we're just asking questions all the time. They're answering those questions. We're sometimes involving different people from the company, asking them questions because they're specialists. So we really wanted to implement this, but how to implement this in our company? That's a bit different because Tom Gilb has something called Startup Week, where he meets with a company and he sort of proves that his approach is very useful. So he gathers a bunch of people, he asks them a few questions, and just provides a very limited sort of list of the most aching problems in the company that way. So he time boxes very, very heavily. In 5 days' time, it doesn't matter how big the company is, he will have a few solutions for the company to improve. And it doesn't matter how big those solutions are. They can be very insignificant, but if the cost is low, it might be still a good idea to implement them, right? Of course, it's best if the gain from implementing that change is really great and the cost is really low. Of course, that's the best solution, right? Usually. So we really like coffee, and we really like Tom Gilb's approach. And we decided to name our approach, which is really very, very similar to Tom Gilb's, value blended. So that 5-day stretch where we meet with clients and really work hard on discovering the biggest issues in the company, how we can improve the company and in the fast and the best way we can. We call that cappuccino. And before that, we have espresso and lungo that are just shorter periods of time where we do pretty much the same thing. So we analyze the business with the client, and at espresso we do it for 3 hours and we just introduce ourselves, and then we start with stakeholders in a project. So usually the client doesn't have stakeholders with him, so he just pretends that he is those stakeholders. So for example, it doesn't have to be users of an app, for example. It can be the sales department, it can be marketing, it can be many different types of people. And we find out, we do it really quickly, and we find out what their needs are when it comes to that solution, to that system application. But 5-day period is what we think the minimum needed to really go through the whole process and gather the most important stuff. So we limited ourselves with PizzaPortal. We asked them whether we could work with them like this. Uh, and PizzaPortal is not a small company. It's one of the leaders in Poland delivering food, and it's in a competitive market. They already have a set of apps that we worked with them for a while before we asked whether we could work with them on Cappuccino. They have a multinational system, so not only in Poland but in other places. But Poland is really competitive, and they agreed. They said, let's try it, because we are transforming constantly. We're measuring a lot of stuff, but we really need to know what things to do with that information. And since we are already cooperating, it seemed like a good idea to just continue, but based on data that could really matter. Not just change requests, right, that just resulted in specific things being implemented that they asked for, but on business value. So we met in Łódź with Marcin, and we talked with Lech and a bunch of other people from PizzaPortal, from sales, marketing, and so on. And there were 5 of us there from Senfino, and we started on day 1 with just quantifying the most important objectives. So the board at the very beginning was completely empty. We filled it up on the first day with a list like this, you can see on the right. We listed all the stakeholders. So Lech is, for example, very high up because he's the boss, right? Marcin is very high up because he worked with us on apps, and he was most of the time with us in Łódź. And we just went through all the requirements that those people might have. We also later met with those people, and they created together even more such requirements. So you can see quite a few. Well, I'm sure we would have found even more, but we were time boxed, so we decided to cut it there and just decide which ones are the most important out of this whole list of requirements. And this was stuff like more orders, better food discovery, so on. So not just users, but also sales department, support that had users calling them and they didn't know how to respond to some of the issues they had because the system wasn't perfect in some of the areas. So we got to know all of these things, and it's really good when the boss isn't around with the stakeholders. PizzaPortal is a really great company, and I'm sure they like working there. But when we just sat down with specific people, we got a lot of issues that we didn't know about at first. So we quantified some of those. We said stuff like we want the speed of the interface to increase. We had an existing interface and we wanted to increase by 10%. These are some real examples from the list we created. So the percent of satisfaction of time of delivery, because users would like to know exactly what the time of delivery will be, but technically we cannot deliver this. So what can we do with this? Sometimes it's enough to just have the app say like we've been in 45 minutes, for example. But if it will be in 20, the user will not be satisfied either. So an hour is too much, but 20 is also too little because he can go and do something else during that time. He expects the time to be rather specific, maybe 10 minutes more or less, but not, half an hour. So with each of these requirements, we try to find at least 2 numbers. So the goal, which is something we would like to have, and sort of a failure value, which means we're not improving, but we're also not doing worse than we did before. And this happened on day 2 because we were a bit delayed. because of the number of requirements we got on the day before, so we had to continue on the second day. So the second day should be, according to Tom Gilb, a draft of a top 10 architecture hypothesis set. So based on the requirements, we try design ideas. And once we have those design ideas, like we should add servers or we should optimize the app, stuff like that, we can put it in an impact estimation table on day 3. So we were already getting a bit tired by then, but we kept going. And we drew all the most important requirements, design ideas on top, and we just decided how far we can go with by implementing those design ideas and solving specific requirements. So we again started with a pretty empty board, and we ended up with a full table with cells filled with the percentage of where we will go with a specific solution. So for example, we want to optimize the speed of an app. We can do it by adding servers. We can do it by optimizing the app by changing the code inside, right? So adding servers can help us in, like, say 20%. Optimizing the app can help us in 50%. But optimizing an app has a cost, right? And a bigger cost than just adding a server, a new server, right? So we had a list of requirements. Down there we had a list of costs, and we used them both to say which solutions are the most important for us. And so we chose 5 out of all of them. And as you can see, this is stuff like reminding end users to rate their orders. And okay, so we found out all the most important stuff, right? On day 4 and day 5, it's really just approval. So we want the whole team on both sides to be on board, and we want them to cooperate when we start implementing all of this stuff. Once we have an impact estimation table filled, we decided to use Google Ventures Sprint Week, right? Design Week, sorry. So we drew up a lot of prototypes, and those prototypes responded to various solutions that we found earlier. And we decided which of those prototypes were the best. And later on, we started implementing them. So we don't really use anything special during implementation. We just use plain Scrum, so we have planning, we have daily meetings and so on. But they're all based on business requirements. So when a programmer has a problem, he often doesn't need to call the client and ask about something. He can decide for himself because he knows what the business requirements are. So if the most important need for us is to have a good user interface, then while implementing, he will oftentimes know what to do because of that. So he will work more on the user interface instead of making the app quicker or more stable sometimes, right? So this way we can have more motivation in the team as well, because we can dynamically move towards implementation based on what we did earlier during Cappuccino, right? People on our team are more motivated because they know what to do exactly. People on PizzaPortal side get their specific needs fulfilled this way, and it's not written in stone. So we might not be sure about some values in the table that I've shown you. So we write that down as well, and when we move on during implementation, some of those values might change. Some might get more specific. Some columns or requirements might just disappear. It's solely possible to change the table and make it look at the very end completely different. But we've already started with something that we have had enough confidence with to the development, and it didn't last a long time. It lasted a week, right? So it's well worth the effort. And our programmers, our graphics designers, whoever else is involved knows exactly what to do, right? And we can still adapt because we're using Scrum. In our case, it's weekly Scrum, so we have weekly sprints, and we can still adapt as much as we want. But it's not just programming for programming's sake. So that's really it. We're still working with PizzaPortal right now on implementing the most important things that we found out together. And if you have any questions later on, I'll be here for a while. So if you want to talk to me, then go ahead or write to me. Thanks.